One of Christianity's oldest surviving structures, the great cathedral at Salisbury in southwest England, was built between 1220 and 1266 AD. Its 404-foot spire, which remains to this day the tallest in Britain, was added a century later. Old as it is, however, the cathedral offers in its environs tantalizing hints of a much older order than medieval Christendom, a world whose achievements in art and sciences may have reached far beyond the ken of Salisbury's daring steeplejacks and left its immense signature written directly upon the English landscape.
Compare it, say, with Delphi, which was the Greek center, and the land round there was sacred. It was farmed only for the priests and for people who came to the festivals. Indeed, there was a tribe, a nation, which was actually responsible for it, and they held the games and they protected the rights of the sanctuary.
Kind of like the tribe of Levi, or the ecclesiastical,
very much like
ecclesiastical
the
tribe.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
You think they had that, whatever culture did this, had that?
I think they did it here, yes. Because when you look at this land right here, it's all ritualized, it's all full of monuments. And so something about it which suggests it was always, there's a light and an atmosphere about the land around here which suggests it was, I know that's tenuous, but by comparing it with other cultures where the sanctuaries were preserved for the priests and for the high king's table, whatever it was, as they were state lands.
The full reality and scope of that ancient civilization is only beginning to be appreciated. Today, the haunting echoes of an almost unspeakable antiquity are sounding in many quarters, especially in southwest England, and drawing pilgrims from around the world to search for clues to the forgotten origins of humanity and civilization on this planet.
He didn't give opinions. He was speaking the truth. Today we don't like the idea of the truth, do we? We say, is it your truth or my truth? We like things relative. But our societies don't last very long. We're always changing.
Under the auspices of Atlantis Rising magazine, a group gathered recently to study the evidence.
For years it was a fashion for the archaeologists, oh, it's all explained, it's all understood. But that's all come unhinged now because of things which can't be explained very easily. It all is a mystery.
Accompanying us was John Michell, a Cambridge-trained scholar and one of the world's foremost authorities on ancient science and religion, and Busty Taylor, whose intense investigations of English sacred sites and the crop circle phenomenon through photography and the ancient science of dowsing have made him something of an international pundit. I'm Doug Kenyon, editor and publisher of Atlantis Rising. That's me with the gray beard. And beside me is my wife, Patricia. Join us now on a quest through English sacred sites for clues to a forgotten ancient heritage, what some might call the Atlantis connection. On the day we visited Salisbury Cathedral, the official guide was full of fascinating information about the origins of the place.
It would not seem sensible to try and build a structure of this size and weight and height and so on in an area where you're close to a river. There are 2 or 3 rivers all coming together. You have what are essentially water meadows, swampy land. The last possible place in the world you would think would be sensible to build a cathedral. But it turned out that, firstly, the site was available because it was actually owned by the bishop, as was the whole of the area, which is now Salisbury. And secondly, because underneath the cathedral here is a bank of gravel, which is on average about 18 feet thick. It's about 25 feet thick where the crossing of the cathedral is. And it's big enough to accommodate the whole length of the cathedral and the whole width of the cathedral. And also, and that was really rather important, it also pointed east and west.
Among the many fascinating facts we learned, the 1-ton stone blocks of which the cathedral was constructed were hauled to the site from nearby quarries by ox cart, one at a time. But something is wrong with this picture. If moving 1-ton blocks in ox carts constituted an engineering high point, what was to be made, we wondered, of the much older stones at nearby Stonehenge and Avebury, most of which weigh many times Salisbury's largest. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's important to note that Salisbury was built to replace the nearby cathedral at Old Sarum, which had suffered an unhappy relationship with the adjoining troop garrison and was ultimately burned to the ground. Tradition has it that the new site was selected by shooting an arrow from the old city. That story, however, has been called into question by the more recent discovery that the cathedral is sited on a perfectly straight track which runs from Stonehenge through Old Sarum, Salisbury Cathedral, and on to Clearbury Ring. Such straight tracks can be found all over England, joining ancient sites and churches in a vast and mysterious network of what are called ley lines.
The main axis goes from East Anglia along something called the Icknield Way, a prehistoric path that falls on the whole axis, which goes right to the west, extreme west of Cornwall. And all along it there's shrines, and sometimes evidence of tracks, and then other trackways converge upon this place.
Here we are on the West Kennet Longbarrow. What I'm asking is direction of flow to the ley line, and you see it's pointing to the right. And if we look to the right, the actual axis of this particular monument runs straight through the church that's at least a mile away.
Some researchers, such as Busty Taylor, employ the ancient practice of dowsing, long used by well diggers to find water and others to find other things, to establish the location of ley lines.
As soon as we go over the edge, we get in the middle, and we come over the edge again, it dowses out. So to me, the ancient sites and all the churches of England are all connected to the same system. And I asked the question just now, is it water? And I'm asking the question now for water, and it's very lively on that. So it could be a water flow right through the middle of the church. Okay?
I see.
But if we ask for a gas pipe, gas pipe, gas pipe, gas pipe, gas pipe, gas pipe, you get nothing. You see? If you ask for electricity, 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 nothing. But if we come back and we ask for the water again, let's see what happens. If you ask me the question why it does that, I can't answer it. It's just something, it's a natural thing that anybody can do, a bit of practice. If I had a hazel twig, it will be very violent here. It would actually rip the bark off the branch. If I held onto it tight enough, it would tear the bark off it, even snap the twig, because it would go on down. And you try not to stop it. If you want to find out what happens when you dows around these, as you get level with the stones, you get this type of reaction.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Where you get gaps, you can get the opposite. If we walk around the outside, you'll actually get the rods going one way and then the other.
Stonehenge is an important hub in this ancient network, from which major ley lines radiate in many directions to many other ancient sites.
It's to do with the stars that play upon them. They're orientated towards certain star rises. They make lines with each other, which you're speaking of. And as I said, there's dozens of these places, and they're big. They're all so arranged as to somehow change the skyline, so that you can see the rise of one star in one direction, the setting of the other. All these stars are to do with, are the ones which folklore and mythology are to do with the progress of the soul.
Of course, people in those days were largely nomadic. They moved around their territory, not just all over the place, but in a seasonal round. And then they'd have pilgrimages and journeys to sanctuaries and such. But they were, you said among the natives of Australia, they repeat the creative round. They follow the footsteps of the gods who instituted all the landmarks of the landscape and give them all their use. So people follow this creative passage. And things like the Arthur legend, which was a Celtic sort of state myth, it goes round the countryside. So you get episodes of the King Arthur myth, the same episodes located in many different places wherever the Celtic culture prevailed.
It's like the Stations of the Cross.
Like, indeed, you see, Christianity or formal religions that then sort of almost miniaturize the former nomadic round and locate them round a church or round a saint, rather than people settled and they miniaturize their round. I think that let's say in the Bronze Age that people would have settled, but the rulers and judges would keep going on the round, holding court at different places, and wouldn't regard themselves as settled. But among the 12 tribes of Israel, it wasn't until later that someone, that King David, took Jerusalem and made that into a settled capital.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, and even then, he moved round the tribes holding court, because it says in the Old Testament that each tribe had to provide for the court for 1 month of the year, which meant he was travelling around.
Talking about the zodiacal round, actually.
Like exactly, like the zodiacal round, yes. Moving, like the king being representative of the sun, moving through the zodiac of his realm.
And that, of course, your 12 tribes, your 12 stations,
the 12 episodes of the myth, even the 12 notes of religious music.
Busty Taylor is one of those who see a connection between the ancient ley line arrangement and the curious modern phenomenon of crop circles.
If you count them, there are 12 circles. Where people have walked around and around the formation, they've knocked the corn out and it's regerminated, so that's new growth of wheat, which is what that film was all about.
A licensed pilot as well as a photographer, Taylor has made it a personal mission to document the gigantic patterns which appear overnight around the world, and especially in the English countryside.
Some of them are up to 500, 600 feet in length. Crop circles form from the center and come out. Sometimes they start from the outside and go in their construction. And this is some of the things that a lot of people don't mention, especially the people that say, we did it with the board, you see? Because they can't start from the outside and come in.
Unlike crop circles, the ley lines themselves are certainly very old, predating by thousands of years many of the structures which have been carefully placed upon them. It is clear that the practice of the early Christian church of placing its churches upon spots revered by the local populace has served to mark for posterity the existence of a much more ancient local order. The mere existence of such awe-inspiring sites as Stonehenge and Avebury defy explanation as but the superstitious accomplishments of mere primitives. Yet, such remains the conventional view. Established academic theory also holds that the original British inhabitants migrated in from the European mainland, notwithstanding the fact that many English megalithic structures, such as Stonehenge, are older than similar structures near the homes of presumed ancestors.
And then we've got the sort of tradition, say in Ireland, of a culture which a very deep and beautiful oral culture, which goes back a long time. It wasn't recorded until sort of early Christian times, but the old chronicles are written down from much earlier sources.
Michell has written extensively about the culture which preceded the Christians and even the ancient Celts and their Druid priesthood, and he is sympathetic to the view that England's early heritage was established by people who came from the West, survivors of the destruction of a once great civilization which existed at some now vanished spot in the Atlantic Ocean, the same one perhaps identified by the Greek philosopher Plato as Atlantis. The survivors, it is thought, established a system of megalithic markers throughout England to preserve their social order. Such views, inasmuch as they challenge conventional views of prehistory, remain controversial. Nevertheless, the eloquent testimony of the stones and the advanced order they imply is difficult to dispute. The ruined temple of Stonehenge is generally conceded to be the most remarkable prehistoric structure in Europe. The great circle of precisely cut-in-place giant standing stones is 8 miles north of Salisbury in Wiltshire. The entire area, says John Michell, is littered with the marks of ancient sanctity, including burial mounds, earthworks, and other prehistoric monuments.
What the hell was this thing for? It's a temple, certainly. But it's not just a pious temple you go and sort of... It's something which really changed people's lives. To make that incredible effort, the whole of society must have been sort of subordinated to building this remarkable structure. It's not just a physical labour, it's incredibly advanced knowledge portrayed in it. I mean, I've studied this thing for years. And it's part of a tradition which goes back to very ancient times and came into original Christianity.
Research by numerous scholars has established that the alignment of the stones conforms to principles of advanced geometry and that it once served as some kind of astronomical observatory capable of, at the very least, predicting both lunar and solar eclipses. Shortly after sunset on a cloudless September day, our little band of pilgrims feels the presence of awesome forces among the stones.
I'm more or less standing in the center of Stonehenge. The summer solstice is through this arch on my right-hand side. The altar is here on my left, what they called the altar. We have the giant stones here, the center part of Stonehenge, the horseshoe shape, the trinolon. And as you see, a few of them have fallen down. If you're here in the summer, on the summer's day, June the 20th, to see the sun come up over that horizon is absolutely magnificent. What you see here are the bluestones running around on this side. They're the ones that's brought all the way from Wales, some 100 kilometers away to the southwest. People don't know why they use the stones from Wales on the inner part. We can't at the moment work out how they got the big stones at the top up there, because it's a real interesting engineering feat. This stone, possibly 30 tons. How did they get it up there?
That's the man in Homestead, Florida.
All right. Now what you have to look at here is the fact they have mortise and tenon joints. You can see the high part on the stone there,
And they sit on.
and the recess here. Who taught them to mortise and tenon and actually get everything so flat that it fits perfectly? They estimate that it most probably took them 5 or 6 years to move it a piece. So it wasn't something that was achieved overnight.
In terms of sheer magnitude and complexity of construction, the greatest stone circle in the British Isles is to be found at Avebury. Like Stonehenge, it occupies a central position in the system of ancient tracks which crisscross the entire English landscape. One astonishing, perfectly straight line runs all the way from East Anglia to the Dorset coast, marking the longest continuous stretch of British landmass and the line of the sun's passage at summer solstice, passing through dozens of shrines and sacred sites, including St. Michael's Tor at nearby Glastonbury. Sitting midpoint on the line, Avebury is at the virtual center of southern England. The surveying and mathematical skills required to lay out such a vast, yet precise arrangement surpass anything in known human history until recent centuries.
Caesar says himself that the Druids knew the size and shape of the earth and talked about those matters. And the surveying of land has been an aspect of ancient science which has been very much neglected. But it's related to astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about ancient astronomy, it wasn't the astronomy we have today. It was to do with, I'm sure, with using the influences of sun, moon and stars in connection with the ceremonies and with the fate of the dead and the progress of the soul.
But it was their knowledge was precise in these things, and it was because
indeed,
their
yes.
maps were they weren't general. They were measured down to the nth degree. Yeah?
Well, I've got examples of, say, island territories where you can tell the boundaries because they're defined by nature, where the surveyed centre is actually on the main axis of that island, the very centre, not an inch off.
But Avebury is just part of the country, and you can see how Avebury was the main gathering, rallying place for the Bronze Age or even earlier tribal people who came there from all over the southern part of the country. And there's many of the roads, ancient roads, lead towards there. And you see it has all the attributes of a national sanctuary.
It seems to me that all this area is a ritualized area. There's monuments all over the place which are to do with, obviously, with the whole complex. And almost certainly this land was farmed for the benefit of the priests and the people who came to the festivals. It was a kind of priestly territory.
wasn't discovered until the 17th century. Stonehenge was always known. It's always been there. It's obvious. It's a it's very organized, very civilized, very organized priestly temple standing in the middle of nowhere. Avebury sort of integrated that. They built a village inside it, an old Saxon village. There's a church and such. It's just lovely, actually. It's a lovely place to visit.
Well, sometimes called the Druid Seat or the Archdruid Seat, and there's a kind of like a hole going out of the chimney. And the story is, if you sit there, you tend to become pregnant.
A beautiful building makes a fine ruin, whereas an ugly one makes an ugly ruin, doesn't it? When you see these rocks, they're enormous, and they're placed. It's been terribly destroyed since then.
Certainly the view from St. Michael's Tor is an exalted one. The highest spot in the Isle of Glastonbury is reached by a laborious climb up the Pilgrim's Path.
We've got a tower left up there from a church because the first one fell down in an earthquake. So this has been rebuilt to replace what happened many, many years ago.
In the 14th century, a church was built at the top to replace an earlier one. The chanting tower is all that remains, but archaeologists have found evidence of an extensive monastery. Before Christianity, Celtic hermits maintained cells on the hill, and there is also evidence of prehistoric activity. Ancient terracing apparently formed a vast labyrinth, which it seems likely served for some kind of spiritual initiation, culminating perhaps in mystic illumination at the summit. The process for our group may not have been quite so intense, but it was not without its challenges and its rewards.
If there was a clear day, you can actually see the Atlantic from this point here, because you're not that far from the actual coastline whatsoever. Yeah, that's to the southwest. And to the west is you're straight down to Cornwall, Land's End. And this is the south coast over here. And of course Stonehenge is through here to the east. That's where Stonehenge is. And as you know that...
Isn't that hill over there and this on a direct line with Stonehenge?
if we check into it, most probably it is.
I'm pretty sure it's one of the leads that John shows in his
Yep.
book. We're looking at essentially an infrastructure.
That's right.
Where you have essentially the nodes of a communications grid. That's what it suggests more than anything else.
That's right.
There was certainly some form of communication. If nothing else, it was beacon fires. But the suggestion is it was really much more sophisticated, much more advanced than that, as evidenced by the precision of the alignments, the size of the stones, the difficulty of the placement, the altitude, all of those, the logistical challenges, so forth, indicate that there was something more sophisticated than simply notifying people of impending invasions, for example. We live in the ruins of a structure so vast that it's hitherto been invisible. So now we're getting enough altitude that we can start to see, where the beams have been buried. And the Lee line structure suggests nothing so much to me as, as a vast ruin or a vast haunted house where, whatever, maybe the pieces have been knocked out of place or so forth, but what we're seeing there is we're seeing hidden remains of some pointing us toward the presence of an order. And it's the order that's important here. What it suggests is, a coherent structure, vast in its conception, and design, which For what purpose remains a mystery, but nevertheless you cannot deny the presence of the order. It's like they come in, they look at the Roman aqueducts, and it's easy to deduce, you know, that they had a plan for catching water and transferring it from point to point and preserving it for whatever. Because we understand, you know, the logistics of water transport, so we're able to put this all together. But we come in and we see a structure just as coherent, just as fully evolved, but because we don't understand the purpose, we have a hard time accepting that it exists. And I have a feeling that in the future, you know, archaeologists will look at us and, you know, when they get hold of a CD-ROM, they're going to say, well, you know, they made very nice mirrors in that time. They really had the art of mirror making down to a, you know, fine science, and we respect them for that. They could really polish very well.
In the town below, many believe lies the heart of Christian mysticism. The legends of King Arthur, the Round Table, the Knights of the Quest, and of course, the Holy Grail. Today, the Chalice Well and nearby Glastonbury Cathedral remind travelers of the legendary origins of that unique form of English Christianity.
The Celtic Church is another difference. They used to have their services in the open air. They didn't go much on churches and buildings to sit in. They had little little huts for the monks to sleep in bad weather, but if the weather was anything decent, they'd be out in the open. That was this is a Norman abbey, nothing to do. This is a Romish abbey, yeah, not a Celtic abbey, the one you're looking at. Yeah, the Celtic abbey would have been very much smaller. And it's probably just a little church and a little white building around it, and the rest would have been buildings for the monks to live in and work in and all that. And that little church just there as a symbol. That it's not they weren't great big builders of great big, you know.
But you don't have Norman abbeys before 1066, do you?
No, but this replaced the destroyed ones.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the one that went up in flames. This replaced it, and
they
this is a
rebuilt it.
Norman abbey. This was rebuilt afterwards.
And when was this destroyed? Or when did that?
Henry VIII.
It is interesting that the reputed site of the first Christian church in England is located with precise reference to the ancient Lee system. Joseph of Arimathea, the uncle of Jesus, a tin merchant, is said to have traded with Cornish miners. On one of those trips, the story goes, he was accompanied by his nephew. Years later, after the crucifixion, Joseph is said to have returned to Glastonbury with the cup which received the blood of Christ, and to have built a church of wood and wattles on the spot where today can be found the grey stone ruins of what later became the greatest cathedral in England. Curiously, the ground plan of St. Mary's Chapel on the site employed geometric principles virtually identical to Stonehenge. According to tradition, Joseph placed the crucifixion cup in nearby Chalice Well, from where its wondrous radiations have inspired questing knights ever since. Whatever the historical truth behind the story, it seems clear that to this day the area exerts a kind of magical influence over all who approach. Among mystics, the dreams of Camelot and Avalon seem strangely akin to those of Atlantis, and Arthurian tales of a Lady of the Lake suggest some ideal world buried deep beneath the waters of the unconscious. Whatever may have been forgotten about the origins of civilization on this planet, strange as it sounds, it seems more than possible that many of the clues which will lead us to the truth remain to be discovered in the environs of the spot it is said was once called Camelot. It seems clear that orthodox theories of English prehistory are, to put it kindly, lacking in true insight. With every new discovery, the notion that the vast tapestry that we can now see carved upon the English landscape was the work of ignorant primitives becomes less credible.
People are living very close to the sources of life. I think in modern years we lost that. The Celtic people are terrifically genealogical. They're always talking about who their grandfather was, who their great-grandfather was, and so on. And of course, in the old days, before television, when entertainment was by storytellers going round, what they really told you was about what your ancestors did, how they killed a dragon there and fought a giant there, and relating it to the landmarks of the landscape. So you felt very much at home in your own country. And you felt that you were part of a long chain, and not just living a chance and rather tenuous existence. You were part of a sort of inevitability, a part of law.
As John Michell has said, we find ourselves in the ruins of a structure so vast it's been invisible till now. Only now, like Salisbury steeplejacks, are we beginning to attain sufficient altitude to behold the magnitude of the ancient achievement and to find at last the proper attitudes with which to contemplate its majesty. Awe and respect, if not reverence. We have been preceded by giants.